All right. We are going to continue our story. Story of Secret Garden. Chapter 10. Dickon. The sun shone down for nearly a week on the secret garden. The secret garden was what Mary called it when she was thinking of it. She liked the name, and she liked still more the feeling that when its beautiful old walls shut her in one and no one and shut her in, no one knew where she was. And she liked still more the feeling that when its beautiful old walls shut her in, no one knew where she was. It seemed almost like being shut out of the world in some fairy place. The few books she had read and liked had been fairy story books, and she had read of secret gardens in some of the stories. Sometimes people went to sleep in them for 100 years, which she had thought must be rather stupid. She had no intention of going to sleep, and, in fact, she was becoming wider awake every day which passed at Misselthwaite. She was beginning to like to be out of doors. She no longer hated the wind, but enjoyed it. She could run faster and longer, and she could skip up to 100. The bulbs in the secret garden must have seen must have been much astonished. Such nice clear places were made round them that they had all the breathing space they wanted. And really, if Mistress Mary had known it, they began to cheer up under the dark earth and work tremendously. The sun could get at them and warm them, and when the rain came down, it could reach them at once. So they began to feel very much alive. Mary was an odd, determined little person, and now she had something interesting to be determined about. She was very much absorbed, indeed. She worked and dug and pulled up weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work every hour instead of tiring of it. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. She found many more of the sprouting pale green points than she had ever hoped to find. They seemed to be starting up everywhere, and each day she was sure she found tiny new ones. Some so tiny that they barely peeped above the earth. There were so many that she remembered what Martha had said about the snowdrops by the thousands. Snowdrops by the thousands. And about bulbs spreading and making new ones. These had been left to themselves for 10 years, and perhaps they had spread like the snowdrops. And perhaps they had spread like the snowdrops into thousands. She wondered how long it would be before they showed that they were flowers. Sometimes she Sometimes she stopped digging to look at the garden and try to imagine what it would be like when it was covered with thousands of lovely things in bloom. During that week of sunshine, she became more intimate with Ben Weatherstaff. She surprised him several times by seeming to start up beside him as if she sprang out of the earth. The truth was that she was afraid that he would pick up his tools and go away if he saw her coming. So she always walked toward him as silently as possible. But, in fact, he did not object to her as strongly as he had at first. Perhaps he was secretly rather flattered by her evident desire for his elderly company. Then, also, she was more civil than she had been. He did not know that when she first saw him, she spoke to him as she would have spoken to a native, and had not known that a cross, sturdy old Yorkshire man was not accustomed to salam to his masters, and by merely commanded by them to do things. "Thou'rt like the robin," he said to her one morning when he lifted his head and saw her standing by him. "I never knows when I shall see thee or which side thou'll come from." "He's friends with me now," said Mary. "That's like him," snapped Ben Weatherstaff, making up to the woman folk just for vanity and flightness. "There is nothing he wouldn't do for the sake of showing off and flirting his tail feathers. He's as full of pride as an egg's full of meat." He very seldom talked much, and sometimes did not even answer Mary's questions except by a grunt. But this morning he said more than usual. He stood up and rested one hobnailed boot on the top of his pad while he looked at her, over. "How long had thou been here?" he jerked out. "I think it's about a month," she answered. That's beginning to do Misselthwaite credit," he said. "Thou's a bit fatter than thou was, and thou's not quite so yeller. Thou looked like a young plucked crow when thou first came into this garden. Thinks I to myself, I never set eyes on an uglier, sourier faced young'un. Mary was not vain, and as she had never thought much of her looks, she was not greatly disturbed. "I know I'm fatter," she said. "My stockings are getting tighter. They used to make wrinkles. There's the robin, Ben Weatherstaff." There, indeed, was the robin, and she thought he looked nicer. And she thought he looked nicer than ever. His red waistcoat was as glossy as satin, and he flirted his wings and tail and tilted his head and hopped about with all sorts of lively graces. He seemed determined to make Ben Weatherstaff admire him, but Ben was sarcastic. "Aye, there thou art," he said. "Thou can put up with me for a bit sometimes when thou's got no one better. Thou's been reddening up thy waistcoat and polishing thy feathers this 2 weeks. I know what thou's up to. Thou's courting some bold young madam somewhere, telling thy lies to her about being the finest cock robin on Missile Moor, and ready to fight all the rest of 'em." "Oh, look at him!" exclaimed Mary. The robin was evidently in a fascinating, bold mood. He hopped closer and closer and looked at Ben Weatherstaff more and more engagingly. He flew on to the nearest currant bush and tilted his head and sang a little song right at him. "Thou thinks thou'll get over me by doing that," said Ben, wrinkling his face up in such a way that Mary felt sure he was trying not to look pleased. "Thou thinks no one can stand out against thee, that's what thou thinks." The robin spread his wings. Mary could scarcely believe her eyes. He flew right up to the handle of Ben Weatherstaff's spade and alighted on the top of it. Then the old man's face wrinkled itself slowly into a new expression. He stood still, as if he were afraid to breathe, as if he would not have stirred for the world, lest his robin should start away. He spoke quite in a whisper. "Well, I am danged," he said, as softly as if he were saying something quite different. Thou does know how to get at a chap that does. Thou's fair unearthly, thou's so knowing." And he stood without stirring, almost without drawing his breath, until the robin gave another flirt to his wings and flew away. Then he stood looking at the handle of the spade, as if there might be a magic in it. And then he began to dig again, and said nothing for several minutes. But because he kept breaking into a slow grin now and then, Mary was not afraid to talk to him. "Have you a garden of your own?" she asked. "No, I am patchelder and lodge with Martin and the gate." That's an interesting word. Let's see what it means. It means a young gentleman. Let's see how it's pronounced. No. Yet. Pronounce it.
Bachelor.
Patchelder. Bachelor. All right. Bachelor means a young man. No, I'm a bachelor and lodge with Martin at the gate. If you had one, said Mary, what would you plant? Cabbages and tatters and onions. But if you wanted to make a flower garden, persisted Mary, what would you plant? Bulbs and sweet-smelling things, but mostly roses. Mary's face lighted up. Do you like roses? She said. Ben Weatherstaff rooted up a weed and threw it aside before he answered. Well, yes, I do. I was learned that by a young lady. I was learned that by a young lady. I was gardener too. She had a lot in a place she was fond of, and she loved them like they was children or robins. I've seen her bend over and kiss them. He dragged out another weed and scolded at it. That were as much as 10 years ago. Where is she now? Asked Mary, much interested. Heaven, he answered, and drove his spade deep into the soil. According to what person says. What happened to the roses? Mary asked again, more interested than ever. They was left to themselves. Mary was becoming quite excited. Did they quite die? Do roses quite die when they are left to themselves? She ventured. Well, I'd got to like 'em, and I liked her, and she liked them, Ben Weatherstaff admitted reluctantly. Once or twice a year, I would go on work at 'em a bit, prune 'em and dig about the roots. They run wild, but they was in rich soil, so some of 'em lived. When they have no leaves and look gray and brown and dry, how can you tell whether they are dead or alive? Inquired Mary. Wait till the spring gets at 'em. Wait till the sun shines on them and the rain falls on the sunshine, and then they'll find out. How? How? Cried Mary, forgetting to be careful. Look along the twigs and branches, and if thou sees a bit of brown lump swelling here and there, watch it after the warm rain and see what happens. He stopped suddenly and looked curiously at her eager face. Why does thou care so much about roses and such, all of a sudden? He demanded. Mistress Mary felt her face grow red. She was almost afraid to answer. I want to play that I have a garden of my own, she stammered. There is nothing for me to do. I have nothing and no one. Well, said Ben Weatherstaff slowly, as he watched her, that's true. Thou hasn't. He said it in such an odd way that Mary wondered if he was actually a little sorry for her. She had never felt sorry for herself. She had only felt tired and cross, because she disliked people and things so much. She had only felt tired and cross because she disliked people and things so much. But now the world seemed to be changing and getting nicer. If no one found out about the secret garden, she should enjoy herself always. She stayed with him for 10 or 15 minutes longer and asked him as many questions as she dared. He answered every one of them in his queer, grunting way, and he did not seem really cross and did not pick up his spade and leave her. He said something about roses just as she was going away, and it reminded her of the ones he had said he had been fond of. "Do you go and see those other roses now?" she asked. "Not been this year. My rheumatics had made me too stiff in the joints." He said it in his grumbling voice, and then quite suddenly he seemed to get angry with her, though she did not see why he should. "Now look here," he said sharply. Don't they ask you many... Don't they, that's a they, there. Don't they ask so many questions? Thou'rt the worst wench for asking questions I've ever come across. Get thee gone and play thee. I've done talking for today." And he said it so crossly that she knew there was not the least use in staying another minute. She went skipping slowly down the outside walk, thinking him over and saying to herself that, queer as it was, here was another person whom she liked in spite of his crossness. She liked old Ben Weatherstaff. Yes, she did like him. She always wanted to try to make him talk to her. Also, she began to believe that he knew everything in the world about flowers. There was a laurel hedged walk which curved round the secret garden and ended at the gate, which opened into a wood in the park. She thought she would skip round this walk and look into the wood and see if there were any rabbits hopping about. She enjoyed the skipping very much, and when she reached the little gate, she opened it and went through, because she heard a low, peculiar whistling sound and wanted to find out what it was. It was a very strange thing indeed. She quite caught her breath as she stopped to look at it. A boy was sitting under a tree, with his back against it, playing on a rough wooden pipe. He was a funny-looking boy, about 12. He looked very clean, and his nose turned up, and his cheeks were as red as poppies, and never had Mistress Mary seen such round and such blue eyes in any boy's face. And on the trunk of the tree he leaned against, a brown squirrel was clinging and watching him, and from behind a bush nearby a cock pheasant was delicately stretching his neck to peep out, and quite near him were two rabbits sitting up and sniffing with tremulous noses, and actually it appeared as if they were all drawing near to watch him and listen to the strange, low little call his pipe seemed to make. think that's definitely an animal, but I don't know what's it looks like. Let's see. Oh, it's a type of chicken. A wild chicken. All right. See how it's pronounced.
Cock pheasant.
Cock pheasant. All right. That is a cock pheasant, and it's type of wild chicken. All right. When he saw Mary, he held up his hand and spoke to her in a voice almost as low as an and rather like his piping. Don't thou move, he said. It would flight them. Right, I think he means fright. Mary remained motionless. He stopped playing his pipe and began to rise from the ground. He moved so slowly that it scarcely seemed as though he were moving at all. But at last he stood on his feet, and then the squirrel scampered back up into the branches of his tree. The pheasant withdrew his head, and the rabbits dropped on all fours and began to hop away, though not at all as if they were frightened. I'm Dickon, the boy said. I know thou'rt Miss Mary. Then Mary realized that somehow she had known at first that he was Dickon. Who else could have been charming rabbits and pheasants as the natives charm snakes in India? He had a wide, red, curving mouth, and his smile spread all over his face. I got up slow, he explained, because if thou makes a quick move, it startles them. A body as to move gentle and speak low when wild things is about. He did not speak to her as if they had never seen each other before, but as if he knew her quite well. Mary knew nothing about boys, and she spoke to him a little stiffly, because she felt rather shy. Did you get Martha's letter? She asked. He nodded his curly, rust-colored head. That's why I come. He stopped to pick up something which had been lying on the ground beside him when he piped. I've got the garden tools. There's a little spade and rake and a fork and a hoe. They are good uns. There is a trowel too, and the woman in the shop threw in a packet of white poppy and one of blue larkspur when I bought the other seeds. Will you show the seeds to me? Mary said. She wished she could talk as he did. His speech was so quick and easy, it sounded as if he liked her and was not the least afraid she would not like him. Though he was only a common Moor boy, in patched clothes and with a funny face and a rough, rusty red head. As she came closer to him, she noticed that there was a clean, fresh scent of heather and grass and leaves about him, almost as if he were made of them. She liked it very much, and when she looked into his funny face with the red cheeks and round blue eyes, she forgot that she had felt shy. Let us sit down on this log and look at them, she said. They sat down and he took a clumsy little brown paper package out of his coat pocket. He untied the string, and inside there were ever so many neater and smaller packages with a picture of a flower on each one. There's a lot of magnolites and poppies, he said. Magnolites, the sweetest smelling thing as grows, and it'll grow wherever you cast it, same as poppies will. Them as all come up and bloom if you just whistle to 'em. Them the nicest of all. He stopped and turned his head quickly, his poppy-cheeked face lighting up. Where is that robin as is calling us? He said. The chirp came from a thick holly bush, bright with scarlet berries, and Mary thought she knew whose it was. Is it really calling us? She asked. Aye, said Dickon, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He's calling someone he's friends with. That's same as saying, here I am, look at me, I want a bit of chat. There he is in the bush. Whose is he? He's Ben Weatherstaff. He's Ben Weatherstaff's, but I think he knows me a little, answered Mary. Aye, he knows thee, said Dickon in a low voice again, and he likes thee. He's took thee on. He'll tell me all about thee in a minute. He moved quite close to the bush with the slow movement Mary had noticed before, and then he made a sound almost like the robin's own twitter. The robin listened a few seconds intently, and then answered quite as if he were replying to a question. Aye, he's a friend of yours, chuckled Dickon. Do you think he is? Cried Mary eagerly. She did so want to know. Do you think he really likes me? He wouldn't come near thee if he didn't, answered Dickon. Birds is rare choosers, and a robin can flout a body worse than a man. See, he's making up to thee now. Canna tha see a chap, he's saying. And it really seemed as if it must be true. He so sidled and twittered and tilted as he hopped on his bush. Do you understand everything birds say? Said Mary. Dickon's grin spread until he seemed all wide. Red, curving mouth, and he rubbed his rough head. I think I do, and they think I do, he said. I've lived on the moor with 'em so long. I've watched 'em break shell and come out on fledge and learn to fly and begin to sing, till I think I'm one of them. Sometimes I think perhaps I'm a bird or a fox or a rabbit or a squirrel or even a beetle, and I don't know it, and I don't know it. He laughed and came back to the log and began to talk about the flower seeds again. He told her what they looked like when they were flowers. He told her how to plant them and watch them and feed and water them. See here, he said suddenly, turning round to look at her. I'll plant them for thee myself. Where is the garden? Mary's thin hands clutched each other as they lay on her lap. She did not know what to say, so for a whole minute she said nothing. She had never thought of this. She felt miserable, and she felt as if she went red and then pale. Thou's got a bit of garden, hasn't thou? Dickon said. It was true that she had turned red and then pale. Dickon saw her do it, and as she still said nothing, he began to be puzzled. Wouldn't they give thee a bit? He asked. Hasn't thou got any yet? She held her hands even tighter and turned her eyes toward him. I don't know anything about boys, she said slowly. Could you keep a secret if I told you one? It's a great secret. I don't know what I should do if anyone found out. If anyone found it out. I believe I should die, she said the last sentence quite fiercely. Dickon looked more puzzled than ever, and even rubbed his hand over his rough head again. But he answered, quite good-humouredly. I'm keeping secrets all the time, he said. If I couldn't keep secrets from the other lads, secrets about foxes, cubs, and birds' nests, and wild things' holes, there'd be naught safe on the moor. I can keep secrets. Mistress Mary did not mean to put out her hand and clutch his sleeve, but she did it. I have stolen a garden, she said very fast. It isn't mine, it isn't anybody's. Nobody wants it. Nobody cares for it. Nobody ever goes into it. Perhaps everything is dead in it already. I don't know. She began to feel hot and as contrary as she had ever felt in her life. I don't care. Nobody has any right to take it from me when I care about it, and they don't. They are letting it die, all shut in by itself, she ended passionately, and she threw her arms over her face and burst out crying. Poor little Mistress Mary. Dickon's curious blue eyes grew rounder and rounder. He said, drawing his exclamation out slowly. And the way he did it meant both wonder and sympathy. I have nothing to do, said Mary. Nothing belongs to me. I found it myself, and I got into it myself. I was only just like the robin, and they wouldn't take it from the robin. Where is it? Asked Dickon, in a dropped voice. Mistress Mary got up from the log at once. She knew she felt contrary again, and obstinate, and she did not care at all. She was so imperious and Indian, and at the same time hot and sorrowful. Come with me and I'll show you, she said. She led him around the laurel path and to the walk where the ivy grew so thickly. Dickon followed her with a queer, almost pitying look on his face. He felt as if he were being led to look at some strange bird's nest and must move softly, and must move softly. When she stepped to the wall and lifted the hanging ivy, he started. There was a door, and Mary pushed it slowly open, and they passed in together. And then Mary stood and waved her hand round defiantly. "It's this," she said. "It's a secret garden, and I'm the only one in the world who wants it to be alive." Dickon looked round and round about it, and round again. "Ah," he almost whispered. "It is a queer, pretty place. It's like as if a body was in a dream." Chapter 11. The nest of the missel thrush. Yeah, it's thrush. All right. Let's see how it's pronounced. Missel. I know it's missel is Misselthwaite. Let's see what missel thrush is. Yeah. Oh, it's a bird. It's the name of a bird.
Missel thrush.
Missel thrush. It's the name of a bird. The nest of the missel thrush. For 2 or 3 minutes he stood looking round him, while Mary watched him, and then he began to walk about softly, even more lightly than Mary had walked the first time she had found herself inside the 4 walls. His eyes seemed to be taking in everything. The grey trees with the grey creepers climbing over them and hanging from their branches, the tangle on the walls and among the grass, the evergreen alcoves with the stone seats and tall flower urns and tall flower urns standing in them. I never thought I'd see this place," he said at last, in a whisper. "Did you know about it?" asked Mary. She had spoken aloud, and he made a sign to her. "We must talk low," he said, "or someone will hear us and wonder what's to do in here." "Oh, I forgot," said Mary, feeling frightened and putting her hand quickly against her mouth. "Did you know about the garden?" she asked again, when she had recovered herself. Dickon nodded. "Martha told me there was one as no one ever went inside. Martha told me there was one as no one ever went inside," he answered. "Us used to wonder what it was like." He stopped and looked round at the lovely grey tangle about him, and his round eyes looked queerly happy. "Ah, the nests as'll be here come springtime," he said. It would be the safest nesting place in England. No one never coming near and tangles of trees and roses to build in. I wonder all the birds on the moor don't build here." Mistress Mary put her hand on his arm again without knowing it. Will there be roses?" she whispered. "Can you tell?" "I thought perhaps they were all dead." "Ah, no, not them, not all of 'em," he answered. "Look here." He stepped over to the nearest tree, an old one with grey lichen all over its bark. but upholding a curtain of tangled sprays and branches. He took a thick knife out of his pocket and opened one of its blades. "There's lots of dead wood as ought to be cut out," he said. "And there is a lot of old wood, but it made some new last year. This here's a new bit," and he touched a shot which looked brownish green instead of hard, dry grey. Mary touched it herself in an eager, reverent way. "That one?" she said. "That one quite alive, quite." Dickon curved his wide smiling mouth. "It's as weak as you are. It's as weak as you or me," he said, and Mary remembered that Martha had told her that wick meant alive or lively. "I'm glad it's wick," she cried out in her whisper. "I want them all to be wick. Let us go round the garden and count how many wick ones there are." She quite panted with eagerness, and Dickon was as eager as she was. They went from tree to tree and from bush to bush. Dickon carried his knife in his hand and showed her things which she thought wonderful. "They have run wild," he said, "but they strongest one has fair thrived on it. The delicatest ones had died out, but the others has growed and growed and spread till they's a wonder. See here." And he pulled down a thick, grey, dry-looking branch. "A body might think this was dead wood, but I don't believe it is. Down to the root. I'll cut it low down and see." He knelt and with his knife cut the lifeless-looking branch through, not far above the earth. "There," he said excitedly. "I told thee, so there is green in that wood yet. Look at it." Mary was down on her knees before he spoke. Mary was down on her knees before he spoke, gazing with all her might. Okay, this word, I don't know how it's pronounced, so let's see how it's pronounced.
Exultantly.
Exultantly. It means saying it happy, in a happy manner. Exultantly. Exultantly.
Exultantly.
Exultantly. "There," he said exultantly. "I told thee, so there is green in that wood yet. Look at it." Mary was down on her knees before he spoke, gazing with all her might. "When it looks a bit greenish and juicy like that, it's wick," he explained. "When the inside is dry and breaks easy, like this here piece I've cut off, it's done for. There is a big root here, as all this live wood sprung out of, and if the old wood cut off and it's dug around and took care of, there'll be..." He stopped and lifted his face to look up at the climbing and hanging sprays above him. "There'll be a fountain of roses here this summer." They went from bush to bush and from tree to tree. He was very strong and clever with his knife, and knew how to cut the dry and dead wood away, and could tell when an unpromising bough or twig had still green life in it. In the course of half an hour, Mary thought she could tell too, and when and when he cut through a lifeless-looking branch, she would cry out joyfully under her breath when she caught sight of the least shade of moist green. The spade and hoe and fork were very useful. He showed her how to use the fork while he dug about roots with the spade and stirred the earth and let the air in. They were working industriously. They were working industriously. Round one of the biggest standard roses when he caught sight of something which made him utter an exclamation of surprise. "Why," he cried, pointing to the grass a few feet away. "Who did that there?" It was one of Mary's own little clearings round the pale green points. "I did it," said Mary. "Why, I thought they didn't know nothing about gardening," he exclaimed. "I don't," she answered, "but they were so little and the grass was so thick and strong, and they looked as if they had no room to breathe. So I made a place for them. I don't even know what they are." Dickon went and knelt down by them, smiling his wide smile. "Thou was right," he said. "A gardener couldn't have told thee better. They'll grow now like Jack's beanstalk. They are crocuses, and snowdrops, and these here is narcissus. Narcissus? I was pronouncing this correctly, I'm not sure. Let's see.
Narcissus.
Narcissus. That's the name of a flower.
Narcissus.
Yeah. Narcissus. Turning to another patch, and here's Daffy Dwindlies. They will be a sight. He ran from one clearing to another. "Thou hast done a lot of work for such a little wench," he said, looking her over. "I'm growing fatter," said Mary, "and I'm growing stronger. I used always to be tired when I dig. I'm not tired at all. I like to smell the earth when it's turned up." "It's rare good for thee," he said, nodding his head wisely. "There is not as nice as the smell of good clean earth, except the smell of fresh growing things when the rain falls on them. I get out on the moor many a day when it's raining, and I lie under a bush and listen to the soft swish of drops on the heather, and I just sniff and sniff. My nose and fare quivers like a rabbit's. Mother says—" "Do you never catch cold?" inquired Mary, gazing at him wonderingly. She had never seen such a funny boy, or such a nice one. "Not me," he said, grinning. "I never catched the cold since I was born. I wasn't brought up neat enough. I've chased about the moor in all weathers, same as the rabbits does. Mother says I've sniffed up too much fresh air for 12 years to ever get to sniffing with cold. I'm as tough as a whitethorn knobstick." He was working all the time he was talking, and Mary was following him and helping him with her fork or the trowel. "There is a lot of work to do here," he said once, looking about quite exultantly. "Will you come again and help me to do it?" Mary begged. "I'm sure I can help too. I can. And pull up weeds and do whatever you tell me." "Oh, I do. Do come, Dickon." "I'll come every day if thou wants me, rain or shine," he answered stoutly. "It's the best fun I've ever had in my life. shut in here and wakening up a garden. If you will come, said Mary, if you will help me to make it alive, I don't know what I'll do, she ended helplessly. What could you do for a boy like that? I'll tell thee what they'll do, said Dickon, with his happy grin. Thou'll get fat, and thou'll get as hungry as a young fox, and thou'll learn how to talk to the robin, same as I do. We'll have a lot of fun. He began to walk about, looking up in the trees and at the walls and bushes with a thoughtful expression. I wouldn't want to make it look like a gardener's garden, all clipped and spick and span, would you? He said. It's nicer like this, with things running wild and swinging and catching hold of each other. Don't let us make it tidy, said Mary anxiously. It wouldn't seem like a secret garden if it was tidy. Dickon stood rubbing his rusty red head with a rather puzzled look. It's a secret garden sure enough, he said, but seems like someone besides the robin must have been in it since it was shut up 10 years ago. But the door was locked and the key was buried, said Mary. No one could get in. That's true, he answered. It's a queer place. Seems to me as if there'd been a bit of pruning done here and there later than 10 years ago. But how could it have been done? Said Mary. Howe was examining a branch of a standard rose, and he shook his head. He was examining a branch of standard rose, and he shook his head. He couldn't. How could it? How could it? He murmured. With the door locked and the key buried. Mistress Mary always felt that however many years she lived, she should never forget that first morning when her garden began to grow. Of course, it did seem to begin to grow for her that morning, when Dickon began to clear places to plant seeds. She remembered what Basil had sung at her when he wanted to tease her. Basil. Are there any flowers that look like bells? She inquired. Lilies of the valleys does, he answered, digging away with the trowel. And there is Canterbury bells and campanulas. Let us plant some, said Mary. There is lilies of the valley here already. I saw 'em. I thought I saw them. They'll have growed too close and we'll have to separate them. But there is plenty. The other ones takes 2 years to bloom from seed. But I can bring you some bits of plants from our cottage garden. Why does thou want them? Then Mary told him about Basil and his brothers and sisters in India, and of how she had hated them, and of their calling her Mistress Mary quite contrary. They used to dance round and sing at me. They sang, Mistress Mary quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and marigold all in a row. Marigolds all in a row. I just remembered it, and it made me wonder if there were really flowers like silver bells. She frowned a little and gave her trowel a rather spiteful dig into the earth. I wasn't as contrary as they were. But Dickon laughed. Ah, he said, and as he crumbled the rich black soil, she saw he was sniffing up the scent of it. There doesn't seem to be no need for no one to be contrary when there is flowers and such like, and such lots of friendly wild things running about making homes for themselves or building nests and singing and whistling does there. Mary, kneeling by him, holding the seeds, looked at him and stopped frowning. Dickon, she said, you are as nice as Martha said. You are as nice as Martha said you were. I like you, and you make the fifth person, and you make the fifth person. I never thought I should like 5 people. Dickon sat up on his heels as Martha did when she was polishing the grate. He did look funny and delightful. Mary thought, this, with his round blue eyes and red cheeks and happy-looking turned-up nose. Only 5 folk as they likes, he said. Only 5 folks as tha likes, he said. Who is the other 4? Your mother and Martha. Mary checked them off on her fingers. And the Robin and Ben Weatherstaff. Dickon laughed so that he was obliged to stifle the sound by putting his arm over his mouth. I know thou thinks I'm a queer lad, he said, but I think thou art the queerest little lass I've ever saw. I know thou thinks I'm a queer lad, he said, but I think thou art the queerest little lass I've ever saw. Then Mary did a strange thing. She leaned forward and asked him a question she had never dreamed of asking anyone before. And she tried to ask it in Yorkshire because that was his language. And in India, a native was always pleased if you knew his speech. Does thou like me? She said. He answered heartily. That I does. I like thee wonderful. And so does the robin, I do believe. That's 2 then, said Mary. That's 2 for me. And then they began to work harder than ever and more joyfully. Mary was startled and sorry when she heard the big clock in the courtyard strike the hour of her midday dinner. I shall have to go, she said mournfully. And you will have to go too, won't you? Dickon grinned. My dinner's easy to carry about with me, he said. Mother always lets me put a bit of something in my pocket. He picked up his coat from the grass and brought out of a pocket of lumpy little bundle tied up in a quiet, clean, coarse, blue and white handkerchief. It held 2 thick pieces of bread with a slice of something laid between them. It's oftenest naught but bread, he said, but I've got a fine slice of fat bacon with it today. Mary thought it looked a queer dinner, but he seemed ready to enjoy it. Run on and get thy victuals, he said. I'll be done with mine first. I'll get some more work done before I start back home. He sat down with his back against a tree. I'll call the robin. I'll call the robin up, he said, and give him the rind of the bacon to pick at. They likes a bit of fat wonderful. Mary could scarcely bear to leave him. Suddenly, it seemed as if he might be a sort of wood fairy who might be gone when she came into the garden again. He seemed too good to be true. She went slowly halfway to the door in the wall, and then she stopped and went back. Whatever happens, you never would tell, she said. His poppy-colored cheeks were distended. His poppy-colored cheeks were distended with his first big bite of bread and bacon, but he managed to smile encouragingly. If thou was a missel thrush, and showed me where thy nest was, does thou think I'd tell anyone? Not me, he said. Thou art as safe as missel thrush. And she was quite sure she was. Missel thrush. I want to hear this again. Very, very, very queer word. Queer. We learned a new word.
Missel thrush.
Missel thrush. All right. It's a bird. Yeah. Thou art as safe as missel thrush. And she was quite sure she was. And that will be it for today. And I will see you in the next one.